presented by President Bush, for sure, and definitely not by Prime Minister Tony Blair, who's following along with his new dossier.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Brothers, sisters, friends, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome. It gives me tremendous pleasure to be in New Zealand and to share my story with so many of you tonight. Now I can see a lot of non-Muslims in the room. Just relax, I'm not Islam's answer to Billy Graham. I want to share the story with you so you can enjoy it, maybe understand a little bit more about Islam. The title of the story is From Kabul to Kaaba, but I want to take you back a few weeks before I entered Kabul. I want to take you back to September 11. I bet everyone in this room can remember exactly where they were, who they were with, what they were doing when they heard about September 11. The Muslims that I have spoken to who saw the horrific events unfold on television told me that at the moment of the second plane going into the Twin Towers and realizing it was a terrorist strike, their first reaction was, "Please God, don't let this be the work of Muslims." I was in my newsroom in Fleet Street in London when I noticed people gathering around the television sets that were there. And I shouted over to somebody at the Sunday Express and said, "What's going on?" And they said, "Oh, there's been a terrible accident. There's a plane crashed into one of the Twin Towers in New York." And there's something compelling, isn't there, about live news breaking and live pictures. And I went up and joined everybody else and watched the drama unfold. And then we saw the second plane going in. I've told you about the immediate reaction of Muslims. My immediate reaction was, this is a big, big story. It's bigger than the assassination of JFK, could even be bigger than man landing on the moon. I've got to get out to New York. My reaction was different to those of the Muslims, certainly. By the time I got to Heathrow Airport, the Twin Towers had imploded, the Pentagon had been hit, a plane had gone down in Pennsylvania. America was at war, it was under siege. Her airspace had been closed down, her borders had been sealed, and I physically couldn't get into the country. No matter which airline or which route I looked at, it was impossible. And so I hung round Heathrow in and out for the next 4 days. Finally, I got that ticket for the first flight out to New York. And as I was making my way to the departure lounge, my phone went, and it was my boss, the news editor. He said, "There's been a change of plans. We want you to go to Pakistan." I was furious. The contacts that I had been making were in New York. My clothes that I had packed were for New York. I'd never been to Pakistan. I probably needed injections. You know, what is this country? Why do you want to send me there? This is a Middle Eastern thing. Why don't I go to the Middle East? And he said, "No, the story is going to unfold in Pakistan and neighboring Afghanistan." Within 12 hours, I arrived in Islamabad, dressed for New York, which went down very well, as you can imagine. And over the next few days, I started writing about people's hopes and fears for the impending war which was going to happen in neighboring Afghanistan, where the richest country in the world was going to bomb the poorest country in the world. By the end of the week, 3,000 journalists from around the world had joined me. They were in Peshawar, they were in Islamabad, and they were down in Quetta. Thousands of journalists from all over the world, from print, radio, TV, the internet, every form of communication you can imagine. I worked for a Sunday newspaper. I was the chief reporter of the Sunday Express, and I was trying to second guess what the news would be at the weekend. You get a chance to be more analytical, and I'm not a journalist who has ever been spoon-fed from governments. I don't trust them. And so I began to think that the best story was probably in Afghanistan. From the ordinary people, the ordinary Afghan people, I wanted to know what their expectations and fears were, what life was like for them living under the Taliban. We'd read a lot of news. According to Bush and Blair, the Taliban was the most evil, brutal regime in the world. They subjugated and oppressed women. They killed them randomly. The tales that were coming out were terrible. I distinctly remember Tony Blair saying, "These people are so evil, they won't even let their children fly kites." And so I decided, well, I need to find this out for myself. And I went to the Taliban embassy in Islamabad, and I tried 3 times to get a visa, and 3 times I was rejected. And so in the end, with my guides, I had got 2 or 3 guides who were helping me, I decided to sneak into Afghanistan. The idea was planted in my head by the BBC's chief correspondent, John Simpson, who had put on a burqa and put his toe into Afghanistan and said, "Hey, look, I've become invisible." And I thought, well, if the BBC's gargantuan correspondent can become invisible, then surely it will be easy for me. And so we devised a plan that we would be part of a wedding party. I would go in with 2 guides, one from the NWFP province in Pakistan, the other one was born in Afghanistan. And we went in as a group. I put on the burqa, we drove through the Khyber Pass. That was another eye-opening experience. I imagined the Khyber Pass to be about 30 yards long. It was 33 miles long, winding, dramatic, mountainous roads, amazing scenery, traces of British imperialism everywhere. And then we went right down into a dust bowl known as Torkham, and there was no man's land. We got out of the car and started to walk towards the Taliban checkpoint, where some very scary-looking men with great big beards and big black turbans and Kalashnikovs were sitting, waiting. Suddenly I could hear my heart thump, thump, thump in my ears, and I'm beginning to think maybe this isn't such a good idea. I wanted to turn round and run away, but I'd gone beyond the point of no return. But it was as predicted. I had become invisible. I didn't even warrant a first look, never mind a second look, as we crossed the Taliban checkpoint. I think I was a cross on someone's ID papers. And we went across, we jumped into a taxi, and we headed for the first major city, which was Jalalabad. I was very tense, very excited. I was going to see firsthand what life was like in one of the major cities in Afghanistan, in this male-dominated regime where women were oppressed and subjugated according to Bush and Blair. When we pulled up at the marketplace, I was really surprised. because there, who was doing all the shopping? The men. You can't get Western men into supermarkets or to do the shopping. And there were all these men doing the shopping. I thought, well, this is a good sign. Of course, the reason for that was under the Taliban regime, women were not allowed to talk to strange men. And strange men were any men other than a husband, a father, a brother, or a close male relative. So doing something as simple as buying a bag of sugar was virtually impossible unless you were related to the trader. There were women around. They were all wearing the burqa, and they were in the company of their mahram, or male companion escort. I sat on the edge of the marketplace and watched. And there were lots of Taliban around, and people seemed very excited and very happy. They didn't seem as though they were about to be bombed by the most powerful nation in the world. People seemed relaxed, and I was quite surprised. Our party then went with provisions to a tiny village, not even the size of this hall. And we went into the village, and there was lots of tears and laughter as one of their own had returned, and he brought with him his cousin from the NWFP, his wife, his children. And then they said, well, who's that? Pointing at me. And he told them in Pashto. I didn't understand the language, but I could tell from the reaction that they were not at all happy. Why on earth have you brought a Westerner into our midst at a time of war? That day, the Taliban spiritual leader, Mullah Omar, had just announced that anyone helping a Westerner would be executed. So naturally, they were angry, they were nervous, they were agitated. But within half an hour, the natural exuberance and hospitality and curiosity of the Afghan people overcame the villagers, and they started talking to me. The first was a young girl in her 20s, and I said, what do you think about this impending war? And she said, I am so angry. I should be in a hospital by now, qualified as a doctor, ready to help my people, ready to save lives. People are going to be wounded in this war, and I could help and save them. And I said, so what is your problem? She said, my training was stopped a couple of years ago. The Taliban closed down the training center and sent all the instructors home. And here I am now, back home, rotting away in this village when I should be helping my people. And I felt very sorry for her, and I could feel her frustration. Here was a young, ambitious girl, and her life seemed to have been put in limbo. Just then, her elder brother came in, and he, through the translator, started talking, and he also had been training to be a doctor at the very same medical school. And when it had closed down for financial reasons, he too had been sent home. So it wasn't just the girl who was being affected, her brother was as well. And as we were communicating with the help of the translator, an Afghan lady walked in, and she looked at me very carefully, and she put her hands on her hips, and she really looked me up and down. And then she said through the translator, have you any children? And I said, yes, I have a daughter. She said, just one? And I said, yes, just one. And she pushed me, very strong. I lost my balance and went the other way. And she said, you English and American women, you are all so pathetic. All you can ever have is 1 or 2 children. Me, I can have 15.